Have?
Right about now, we will go straight into the business of the day. We'll be discussing the state of the economy, and to do justice to that is no other person. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning, please, with a round of applause, welcome to the podium Mr. Tayo Aduloju, the CEO of Nigerian Economy Summit Group. Thank you very much.
This is a man you don't want to mess with.
Wait till he grabs the mic.
Yes. No. Can I have my slides, please? Honorable Minister, DG's Presidents, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my task this morning is to discuss the state of the Nigerian economy. A great place to always start is where we are. I think in the last 1 year, everyone will be able to shake their head and say we've gone on an interesting ride. However, the ride of the last 1 year was not created 1 year ago. Since Nigeria came back to democracy, our journey in terms of economic trajectory has been defined by choices that business and political elite make. And our future will depend on a consensus on those choices. Nigeria prosecuted a decade of transformative growth in the first decade of our independence. In fact, the world brought us into a group called the Mint Group. And the designation was for the Mint Group was that these are future powerhouses. By 2025, they will join the top 20 economies in the world. In fact, it was that Mint designation that created the Vision 2020. Because President Obasanjo at that time then said, well, if we can do it by 2025, we might as well aim to do it by 2020. However, that decade of growth was then prosecuted by another decade of decline. In 2023, we basically began the year with a fiscal, unsustainable country. January 1st, we were dealing with, actually debt servicing to revenue in December 2022 was 123%. 123%. Which tells you that we have passed the limits of fiscal unsustainability. Something had to give. And I think that where we've gone since then requires some interrogation. So that's where we want to begin today. So first, for an outline, I would like to look at global trends, focus on the Nigerian economic outlook, point to some critical policies in 2024 that need to be encouraged and fired, look at economic stabilization and what's missing in the mix today, and then talk to you, the captains of industry and business leaders, as some ideas for surviving the volatility, the uncertainty, the ambiguity that the markets have created. And then I have some closing thoughts for Nigerians to reflect and think about. Next slide. So the past 4 years have been 4 years of resilience in the global economy. We're coming out of a once-in-a-century pandemic. It disrupted everything around the world. And back home here, that disruption meant we went into our second recession in a decade. Remember that we had a recession in 2015, driven by overproduction of crude oil. And shale oil production in the US, Iran overproduction, took us into recession in 2016, and I think we came out sometime in 2017. and COVID took us into our second recession. So between two recessions and one pandemic, Nigeria borrowed its way out of two deep holes. That borrowing is what accelerated the fiscal deficits we finally saw. Next slide. Next slide. So, where's the world in October 2024? The projections show that the global economy is recovering, right? Or has recovered. However, due to matters beyond the economy, the projections going forward show that that recovery will now struggle. The world is at war in many theaters, Ukraine, Russia. We are dealing with the Israel conflict that was Israel-Gaza, now Israel-Lebanon, now potential, Israel-Iran or not. And of course, in Africa here, we are dealing with our own drivers. The continent of Africa is dealing with a trilemma of finance, fuel, and food crisis. And this is a Pan-African challenge. There is very few countries in Africa that are not dealing with a fiscal deficit problem that came as from the unsustainable financing of moving themselves out of COVID. So there's a mixed signal globally. The good news is that growth is strengthened, inflation has moderated, but if we don't end these wars all over the place, the good news might be bad news very quickly. Please move on with my slides. Okay, here I'm supposed to be able to do something with this from here. Is that going? Okay, great. So let's get to Nigeria. Now, Nigeria is back growing. That's what the data shows. But the data also shows that that growth is very sluggish. And the growth is behind the targets we have set for ourselves. That's the first big message on the state of the economy. The second big message is that the growth is not just lagging behind the targets. The growth is hindering our capacity to pull enough people out of poverty at the pace that is required for Nigerians to feel some of the strong macroeconomic policy reforms that the Honorable Minister has mentioned. So, when you look at the performance of the key sectors of the economy, here's the problem. Whilst we are recovering, 68% of economic activities are stagnating. That means that the sectors that should create more jobs, lift more people out of poverty, are struggling. And why are they struggling? They're struggling because macroeconomic reforms, whilst they are now yielding their headline macro improvements, have not started to transmit to shifts in the cost of doing business and in the cost of living. So, Honorable Minister, we still have a cost of business crisis and a cost of living crisis. This is an important balance in the message. Is the macro conditions improving? Yes. Are firms and households feeling it? Not yet. And because of that, we have to regulate both the expectation of and the excitement of the message. On the macro side, those of us that are macroeconomists can see that the reserves have been buffered up by the savings that have come from removing the arbitrage in multiple exchange rates. We can see it. It's there. It shows. Which means the 60% of premium that was freighted away by individuals in hidden FX subsidies is now going to where it needs to go, our reserves. Okay? But that also means that the dynamics in the market, without massive growth, liquidity remains tepid, which shows in the supply and therefore in the exchange rate. If we want to shift the system, we must expand liquidity, and liquidity expands when investments come, right? And you need that investment for external liquidity, and you need that expansion in liquidity that comes from export revenues, and you need that liquidity that comes also from the growth internally in businesses, because you can't tax a failed business, you tax the growth of business. So restrictive monetary policies have continued. So what I spoke about, the exchange rate premium, you can see it right there. So the improvements show, but the improvements have not abated inflation. Okay? So while inflation has started to slow down, again, that's a good news. It's slowing down. It's not slowing down at a rate to allow individuals, firms, and households to recover. Our external position has also moved, and I think the Honorable Minister noted this in his speech about the trade surplus. We've moved for the first time in years from a trade deficit to a trade surplus. This is good news. And this good news then translates, of course, into being able to deliver more cash and resources to citizens. Now, revenue has grown, but the revenue is motivated by these subsidy savings on one hand and growing FAC. However, when you look at the deficit in terms of the balance of payments, that's something we need to watch because it's growing again. So, what are the challenges to think about going forward? The managed floating of the exchange rate from a supply side and the hawkish monetary policy stance has to now be tempered with two important imperatives. Not all inflation is driven by monetary policy dynamics. For example, the headline inflation on food requires a different intervention because the food system is contributing to a big component of inflation rate. Without bringing down some of those structural dynamics that are driving inflation on the demand side, we will not be able to make progress. So we encourage the tax reforms, especially tax reforms that suspend taxes on minimum wage and those at the bottom of the pyramid and tax the rich more. This we support, and we think everyone should support it. If you're making a large amount of premium from the Nigerian economy, you should pay a little bit more than others, we think. Now, to stabilize the Nigerian economy going forward, we think that, at least this is the view of the NESG economists, that you need a triple helix approach in addition to the existing reforms. The first is an aggressive approach to tackling food security. The food systems remain vulnerable because across the country, high-yield seeds are not yet pervasive. High-yield seed penetration is still under 15%. We need to make sure all the foods we eat, we can supply high-yield seeds to market. The second is fertilization rate. The rate of fertilization remains very low, below 16%. And most of Nigerian soil without fertilization will not deliver high yield. Now, even if you have soil security and seed security, you must get to the farm. Many of our farming communities still complain about this large amount of intrusion by unknown gunmen and non-state actors that have asserted franchises of violence on our people, and this needs to be addressed. We did a survey earlier on in the year. 30% of cultivated land in Nigeria is not accessible because of these threats to our sovereignty and human security. And it's about time we treat these actors as enemies of the state and deal with them decisively and accordingly. Number two is we need to solve the energy security crisis. The grid has collapsed several times, and sometimes we don't want to tell ourselves the truth. The current business model has created liquidity problems in electricity, and it's no longer sustainable. You have a subsidy that has been unpaid. In other words, we've been subsidizing electricity and not paying for it to the tune now of 2.7 trillion. This can no longer continue. So we must move the business model one way or the other. Either we recapitalize the electricity companies, or we implement a power intervention to pay off our liabilities. But you cannot run a system where the infrastructure needs investment for improvement and there's no liquidity to do it. We'll just be waiting for the next time the grid collapses. So the way forward is solve the liquidity problems and then the investment to create the space required for energy security challenges to be tackled, whilst acknowledging the president's massive push on CNG. That also requires that we free up quickly deep water fiscals for more investment to come into the gas exploration offshore, and also free up on-land resources. We thank the president for the movement to improve oil production in Nigeria, and we've seen the improvement plan. We hope that we can hit the 2.2 million barrels a day in the improvement plan. Ladies and gentlemen, the day of oil is over. Non-oil export trade, trade in goods, trade in services, including trade in advertising services, that day has come. So we must re-gear the business model and the system of Nigeria to be able to pursue this approach. I have argued that there's no state in Nigeria that does not have something to export worth $1 billion a year. That's 36 billion non-oil. That changes the dynamics of the country, balance of trade and balance of payments. We need to start to move in that direction. And if you are running a currency that is depreciated like ours, you're in a perfect opportunity to export. But here's the challenge. Only companies that can afford to export will do so. So if you take a look at the macro pass-through risk on the cost of doing business, raw material, inventory, overhead distribution, you will see that most of businesses are dealing with this high cost of doing business and therefore unable to drive the kind of productivity to get us to export at scale. We need refinancing of key sectors of the economy, and the development finance institutions, Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture need to be recapitalized to provide single-digit longer-term credit to get businesses back to work. Please, this is an imperative if we are going to exploit a depreciated currency for export growth. And we can do it. Countries around the world have done it. China did this for years. Uses depreciated currency driven by heavy trade finance backing their businesses to become the biggest exporter in the world. And it can be done by us here at home. Okay, so just because of time, let me answer the question about the topic of today. Sorry, where's that? So what type of shifts are businesses navigating? We did a survey of businesses in Nigeria. We asked them, what changes are you making seeing that all these things is happening to you? And the top 8 shifts businesses are making is they're going into product diversification, they are going into technology for innovative marketing, they are going into market research and consumer dynamics, they are doing cost optimization, supply chain diversification, they are becoming better at regulatory compliance to reduce the cost of regulation, contingency planning, and hedging exchange rate risk. Now, you will notice that some of these shifts sit perfectly within the scope of the community of practice represented by the advertising industry. Therefore, I want to challenge captains of industry to take advantage of the shifts that's happening to business that align specifically to the advertising industry. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 5, all point to things that advertising experts can help businesses do. So whilst businesses are so-called cutting their balance sheet on traditional advertising, if you can provide some additional services in these areas, your margins may be growing, not shrinking. My last slide. Shifts require agility. When you're in a crisis, the thing not to do is to bury your head in the sand. And that agility requires that both government leaders and business leaders become more responsive. On the regulatory side, we need to see more responsiveness to the market changes. And on the private sector side, we need to see more more resourcefulness in terms of how else to do business. Some big changes in the African Continental Free Trade Area provides opportunities for trading in advertising services. We should exploit that. The fourth industrial revolution is here. It's not going to come, it's now here. And now that it's here, the blending of deep AI tools, deep tools for deeper learning, the intelligent Internet of Things, provides a useful opportunity for resourcefulness. What we used to require, large agencies to do, apps and AI now support us to do it. So you can move people to other productive work and use AI capacity to optimize. We also need to be more reflective as a people. The standard models don't work, okay, without country reflection. Nigeria needs its own homegrown model. A homegrown model to move Nigeria forward must have this export orientation, must have a jobs plan. We must put Nigerians back to work. We must create a national financial architecture that refinances our businesses who have gone through this macro pass-through risk and suffered to move back to the path of growth, productivity, and competitiveness. Let me close by encouraging leaders and the country and citizens. What we are going looks strange, sometimes going through looks strange and painful, but countries have passed through here. And like I said at the last conference, to win at these things, we simply need to win at the fundamentals, what I called the elements of reform dynamics. Number one, reforms must have ethos. The character, the credibility of the institutions, the transparency of the institutions matter. As Nigeria goes through a tough time, I want to encourage the public leaders to make the balance sheet of the country increasingly transparent. Nigeria has many assets that underperform because they are opaque. We must let those assets become not only transparent, but open, and then we as advertisers can help promote these assets around the world. Two, Nigeria needs transparency in its revenues. I had advocated for months that fuel subsidy removal should have had a subsidy savings account where we accounted for all the money we saved and how we used it. That alone would have created more trust. And at a time where the trust deficit between citizens and government is wide, transparency in expenditure matters. When the government says it has put 500 billion in palliatives, citizens want to see where it goes. And this is another area, DG, where your agency can help. Sometimes the work has been done, but the cameras are not on. When you say you've disbursed money to 12 million households, Nigerians wonder where are the 12? Because we're a big country, we're 200 million people. So the cameras, the agency should help create visibility, transparency on these big initiatives because it allows us, the citizens, to trust better in what's going on and it allows all of us to win. The last point I want to make is a point on being resilient. No nation, we watched the American election, those of us that care to watch, that's an over 200-year democracy. And you can see that it's not yet there. We are a 60-year-old democracy, so I want to encourage us that the building of an economy that becomes formidable and lasting takes time. Building a nation takes time. And as long as we're committed to do it together, we will win. Our outlook for next year is that if the reforms are steadied, if they have a reform ethos, if they have a reform pathos, we keep listening to citizens and the citizens know we feel what they feel, and if the messages are clear, transparent, and accountable, these reforms will take off and growth will happen, and the future will be very different from the present and the past. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Doctor, a round of applause to Dr. Tayo Aduloju, CEO, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. We need you on stage for one more second.
Doctor, we need you on stage. You may please take your seat on stage, sir.
For me, let's take two questions, one from your side, one from here. If you have a question, please just signify by raising up your hand, and we will come to you. Okay, there's a lady behind you. Let's take her question. Please let us know who you are your organization or the company you have, and what your question is. Just one question, please. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Amina Muhammad. I'm the MD of Ames Media Company Limited, and I also a member of MQuam. Thank you very much for your very illuminating lecture. My question has to do with what you talked about the power, even though you are not the power minister. But lately, we have experienced a shift. Let me use the language of the conference. A shift of navigating people to whatever band A, band B, band C. And we are told because of that we are assured of constant power supply. You also talked about the collapse of the national grid. But my question to you is in the area of, say they are having challenges because of funds. This band that we have been moved to, where they are generating more money in terms of the tariff, because what gives you 300 units before now gives you about 80 units. Aren't we generating enough money there to provide the succor of the funds they require? That's my question. Thank you.
Should I take that one, or you want to take a couple of questions?
I think you should just respond to that question.
Okay.
We will only be taking few questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Look, a power system is not easily segmentable in practice into A, B, or C, especially when you look at a grid. Here's the truth. The grid requires an upgrade. The upgrade requires money. The money you're generating from band A is not enough. You know, that's the honest truth. And you need a whole different model. So here's what we've done for years. We've created a subsidy upstream in gas. None of us in the power sector is paying the actual price of gas. So we created a subsidy upstream in gas. Then you created a subsidy downstream where no band in Nigeria is paying the cost of running a distribution company. And so what has happened over the years is that to cover that gap, you use an intervention fund. And so we've had several intervention funds over the years. We call them Power Intervention Fund or something. A bankable model, and that's why you've not seen any external investment come into power, because it's not an attractive sector to investment. Because here's the challenge. Whenever you have pervasive subsidies without close accountability, you have arbitrage. Arbitrage creates the basis for corrupt practices and abuse. Abuse ultimately undermines the service, right, that you are supposed to be providing subsidy for. We saw it in PMS, we see it in fertilizer. Anywhere you have pervasive subsidies, where the arbitrage has been created, the corruption will follow very quickly. So you have to solve, one, for the true cost of generating power. Then if Nigeria wants to give a subsidy to Nigerians, then Nigeria must budget for the subsidy. So you should have a line item in the federal budget where that you actually call an electricity subsidy, so that subsidy is paid for by Nigeria. Now, what we have done is that we have not budgeted for subsidy, but we have subsidized it, which means no one is paying for the difference, and that's what's creating the problem. It just requires some accountable mechanisms for first asking what's the cost of power, what's the cost of transmitting and distributing it, what is the gap between what we have asked the citizens to pay, and who will pay the difference. That's the conversation you have to have. The second conversation to have is, if generally those that run the electricity companies do not have the capital for it, you either create an entity that has the capital where they go borrow money to run it, or you recapitalize those businesses. So we must come back to the overhauling of the electricity supply industry to win. And just moving band A alone improves the liquidity for the discos to be able to pay some bills and continue to run, but it's not enough to transform the system. Haji, I hope I have
Thank you very much,
explained.
Doctor.
We have one more question for you.
We have one more question.
Fantastic.
Yes.
My name is Jimo Isaka Oladawaju. I work with May and Baker Nigeria PLC. My question goes thus. As part of what you presented on the slide, on the strategies which the business will adopt for them to grow, if you look at all those factors, today, I only heard that the media could also seek for loans, especially from the BOI. The advertising industry are not part of the people that I mentioned. So I want to know the position, because the reason why we're here is for us to grow. So what is the position of the advertising agencies and other players for them to access this loan? Because we need money. So tell us how we can also be part of this BOI fund. Thank you very much.
I don't work for BUI, so I won't answer that question, but answer a different question.
But you agree we need money.
But here's the thing. Look, because of the macro pass-through risk on key sectors of the economy, we all need money, right? But we don't need expensive money, which is the problem with the MPR tightening, right? Once MPR is at 28.5, when you knock in all the other elements, you're borrowing at 30, 36, 40%. No business grows at that level with all the other inflationary pressure. And that's the challenge. The challenge is that commercial banks must respond to the MPR tightening, and they will transfer that, right, to the final cost of funds that you will get. So we need to repurpose the development finance institutions, including Bank of Industry, to better serve growth segments, right, that require particular type of financing. If you look at, for example, in manufacturing, inventory finance is a big issue for them, because at the FX rate and at the interest rate, they will not be able to bring in cost of inputs, allow them to produce anything the market will buy, right? So that's a challenge. Without cheaper funds, you can't solve that problem. So my brother, you have my sympathy and support. You have my commitment on advocacy to continue to put pressure where pressure needs to happen in terms of development finance. Now, here's the truth. Not all sectors will be able to access development finance because of the very nature of development finance. But this is what will happen. If your key clients access development finance, they all become fiscally bankable and profitable over the long haul, and they can now pay for your services in a sustainable way. That keeps all of you in business. So sometimes the government might make a choice that rather than finance advertising, let's finance the businesses that advertising will support, so that those businesses get back to the regions of profitability and therefore can afford advertising service. So there's always a trade-off in policy on these things. If the advertising industry thinks they desperately need these funds, normally it will go into arguments about what for. And my guess is that the matters that have FX pass-through, like equipment, things that you have to literally buy and bring into the country, will be big on the agenda. I don't think BUI will just simply give the advertising industry money for everything. Even in manufacturing, you see them sometimes say they will only give for buying machinery or building a factory or something. So I think there are particular parts of the cost channel that is attractive to development finance. And maybe this conference will set up a committee to actually look at financing advertising businesses in Nigeria and look at what type of finances you need and where they might come from. Absolutely. And that might be a way to go.
Thank you very much. A round of applause to Dr. Tayo. I think that's the last question. The gentleman, where are you, sir? The gentleman who asked the question. Yeah, how much do you need? No, I'm serious. How much do you actually need? Just give me a figure. Dr. Tayo will hook you up. There's no problem. Please, a round of applause to Dr. Tayo Aduloju, CEO, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. And that's all we're going to have today. Thank you so much. So please, a round of applause. We could listen to you all day. Very insightful presentation. A lot of data thrown at us that are scary, but it is the reality.